reviews, and it's like, it's this endless cavalcade of like bad news, and it makes us feel completely out of control. And of course, our brains, we have evolved to feel anxiety, and anxiety motivates us to make changes. That's all well and good, but if the sympathetic nervous system is constantly hijacked and we're constantly in a state of anxiety, then quality of life goes out the window and we're just reacting. And what we're trying to say is no matter who you are, no matter what you're doing, we want to see people kind of like setting goals and then moving towards that and improving their quality of life thereby. So that's where we're coming from.
Awesome.
So we're going to move into our progress, not perfection. Shane and I just want to give you guys a couple of examples of us like working in crisis, you know, because like I said, for us, holistic farm management is moving from crisis into vision, but like that's not always possible. So for us, we moved to a property on May 15th. Cannabis plants should be in the ground by like June 15th, but we had to, the picture on the left is when we moved there, the picture on the right is after we did in like a 30-day period. It was insane, you know, we had to like do CCD licensing, put up fences, cameras, whatever. Shane will go into some things, but like that was the same year that we got hit with that huge Vermont flooding too. So it's like, I want to give you guys a couple of examples of like, with holistic farm management, sometimes it's a shit show. And like sometimes you're in crisis, but like how can you still have the mindset of working to something holistic, to still be thinking about the land, thinking about our bodies and all of these things. So Shane's going to give you a couple of challenges we had.
Yeah, so hey, and I want to preface this by saying, you know, it said on the label best holistic farm practices, and we changed it to our because it's so subjective to the property you're on, to the goal in mind, this, that, and the third. But at the end of the day, to explain the whole it's a mindset, not a model thing, right? The way that we do that is by holding ourselves accountable to the name that we gave ourselves. Not to pitch, but to explain. Old Growth Vermont, the reason that we chose the name was to imitate the nutrient cycling in the soil of that of an old growth forest. It's self-sustaining, it takes the energy that was taken and it gives it back, and it's just something that we strive to reach. Now, for those of you that are educated in the matter, of course the argument can be made that that's never attainable. Fair. But that is how we set our goals high enough, lofty, to meet them along our path. So how that applies to this is when we moved to the property, like Jesse said, May 15th, we showed up, we knew we had to get plants in the ground, and we had to get them in the ground fast. That's our cash crop, that is how we survive. But we also have this mindset and this goal to always do better. To not just do the things that are directly in front of us. And, you know, I'm going to explain a couple crises, but afterwards I'm going to explain the solutions and then what we did after the solution. Because the goal for us has always been, with a crisis, which we'll always get every season, every farmer in America or in the world knows this, but it's what you do afterwards. And we're still learning in this process. But the first goal, or the first challenge that we arrived at is we took soil samples upon arriving at the property. The soil samples that provided the best soil were on either side of this group of trees. And we knew, upon doing the soil samples and sending them off to the labs, that we needed the greenhouses on the left or the right of those trees. I'm also a full-term sun-grown grower without covering. I love growing outside. I knew I had to put plants in full sun. One of the problems that arose, first of all, I should note that we did not want to cut down these trees. This goes against our mission statement, right? Like the goal is to work with the ecosystem, not against it. And as no-till farmers and things of that nature, what we all need to realize is there's times where you need to till, there's times where you need to cut down, and it's what you do afterwards that really makes a difference, to be perfectly honest. So we cut down the trees, right? And there's one solution. The trees are cut down. Immediately afterwards, now what do? I need to put plants in the ground. Obviously, as no-till growers, we want to plant directly in native earth. There was stumps and roots and everything else of that nature. So as a tough pill to swallow, which again, it's one of those things that like, as long as you keep the long-term goal in mind, it inherently doesn't matter if you're doing a couple things that, you know, go a little bit against what you believe. So we needed to bring in smart pots, and we filled up with Vermont compost soil, you know, enter J. And, you know, the thing is knowing what our goal was and trying to stay on track, you know, here's a beautiful illustration. Upon cutting down the trees, we found the rings encasing what looks like a cannabis leaf. And, you know, I don't know about you guys, but like it made us feel so much better. You know what I mean? It's like, oh my gosh, thank you, universe, we're doing the right thing, you know? But you know, and then enter Vermont Compost, and we filled these pots, and as a bunch of you remember, we got insane torrential flooding immediately afterwards. So like in reality, we cut down the trees, right? They were no longer able to suck up all the water out of the ground, so I wouldn't have been able to plant in the ground right there anyway. So again, the signs pointed, and we had plants above ground, and we survived. Now, that doesn't fit our long-term goal, but again, this is our cash crop. How are we gonna have enough money to build on the property in the future if we don't, you know, settle this in right here? There was one picture that was prior that I wanted to just note for a second. Jay was standing next to the field, yes, right here with the rows. So this was the end of last season. We let 2 years go by, roots slowly breaking down in the soil, and we dumped out our pots and made windrows. This is the same patch right here. So again, although for a couple of years we had to go against the model that we had put out for ourselves, keep it in mind to always do better. And not to, you know, negate from it, but like we didn't have time to do that. We're tired, all the other things, but it's like, when are you gonna do better if not now? Another challenge that we arrived at. So the greenhouses, right? I knew I needed to put up greenhouses because like, and this is taxonomically speaking, there's arguments to be made about this, but most likely, you know, indica short season strains are what thrive outdoors in the Northeast Kingdom of Vermont. I don't want to just provide one type of medicine to people. I want, you know, long season sativas. I want, you know, things of, you know, more tropical varieties, and hence the greenhouses needed to be put in. Another thing that went against our mindset was breaking ground with an excavator. It was not flat earth at all. I mean, it wasn't super steep, but it wasn't, you weren't putting a greenhouse up in it. So, you know, we had to make the decision to break ground. Something that doesn't come lightly, because again, you know, part of the reason we believe in no-till, we don't like destroying the fungal hyphae in the soil. We don't like destroying the biology, and, you know, we're trying to work with the ecosystem. So it's one of those things that, you know, okay, we have 30 days before we have to have plants in the ground. Like, we have plants in the pots now, let's do this. And with our haste came challenges, and I've got no problem admitting that, because that's what happens when you're working in crisis mode on a farm. And I'm sure you guys remember the flood happened in early July, but it rained for a month and a half prior to that. So we broke ground with an excavator, and it was raining, and it continued to rain, and it rained and it rained. And some of the problems that arose, compaction, erosion, and by proxy runoff. And you know, in the whole process, we put the hoops up, but it kept raining. A spring popped out of the ground at the gable end of one of the greenhouses and flooded it. There were streams going through the greenhouses. We had, you know, 10 days to get plants in the ground. Enter shame crisis mode, right? But what we did was we worked at the challenge to find a solution. We dug French drains. You know, and that was to divert the water. That stopped the spring from in the greenhouse. It stopped the streams. Okay, now what? It's still raining. And in our greenhouse, we got our plants in the ground. You know, that could be looked at like, okay, challenge averted, right? But at the same time, we still have broken ground. That's, you know, and like without, you know, remedying it, it's compacting, it's only allowing for native weeds to pop up, and it's not, you know, completing the nutrient cycling that we need in order to feel like we fit our business model, but also succeed. So in the immediate remedy of such things, enter cover cropping. Now I'll get into that a little more afterwards, but you know, in planting daikon radish and Dutch white clover, it prevents erosion, it prevents runoff via root exudates, feeding the soil and the soil microbiome, and it held on to everything. And as you can see, in not too much time, all of a sudden that crisis is averted. Now, in a moment, I'll touch more on what we did afterwards to continue that project.
And just so you guys know, like in the midst of this crisis, like that was hell. If you guys remember the Vermont flooding year for all farmers, but like we compacted our soil. Like we scraped off the topsoil. And like in that solution is like, was me out there haphazardly putting cover crop. I was like so tired, we were trying to survive, but like I still went out and just put the cover crop. And like it didn't look like I wasn't out there with a broad fork yet. That was that following year, which we'll get into. It was like me out there just like, and it worked, you know, but I was at least just sticking to being like, we are making this into a holistic farm. You know, like sometimes that's just like, that's where you start.
Well, and again, that's, you know, that goes off of like, we didn't have time. We didn't have sanity. We didn't have much.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? We had, you know, and like we got the plants in the ground. And that's why we will repeat over and over again, it's a mindset, not a model. Because there's no model I could give any of you for your secular properties or anything of that. But I can instill that as long as it's in your mind, like what can I do better right now that doesn't drain the bank account, that doesn't, you know, this, that, and the third. So anyways.
Yeah, 100%. Okay, we're going to move into ecosystem stewardship, which really for us is like stepping out of crisis, out of those examples that we gave you, and into vision, you know, into some like longer term planning, which is where we all want to be, but we want to do crisis first, so you know, like, listen, that's not always going to happen, it's not realistic, and that's what we do. And so you guys know we're at 11:27. Okay, we've got to like 11:45. All right, so a couple of things we're going to cover is the greenhouses. So like moving from what we just did into like some longer term thing. That was really interesting to see. Some slope on our farm. We've got a big slope we want to show you guys. And it's just really the path and just showing you kind of the direction we're moving with that. And then one of the most exciting is recycling biomass in cannabis. So back to these greenhouses, but kind of moving to the next step.
So as we've mentioned a couple times, you know, also the greenhouse is one thing in their design that we knew we needed was double layer polyplastic. And why that's applicable is because, you know, we try to do things as holistically as possible. We do not bring heaters out there, there are no lights out there. With the double layer polyplastic, it builds a layer of air that works as insulation. And why that's pertinent is anytime it's above 34 degrees in there, you know, in the winter, then the cover crop can be photosynthesizing. Now, you could say that it's never very often above 34 degrees, but that's not if it's outside. The sun can be shining and it can be negative degrees outside and it will be above 34 degrees in there. So the next thing we did after the first season of planting cover crops was we planted a winter cover crop. We planted winter rye, hairy veg, I believe crimson clover, a couple things of that nature. And via the ability to harvest sunlight in these greenhouses, it was able to thrive all winter long. Enter the next spring, and we're ready to hit the ground running. There's been a lot of you know, exudates happening, a lot of photosynthesizing, and this is what the cover crop looked like planting the next season. We have fungal growth and fruiting bodies. We have thriving daikon radish and Dutch white clover. And we have some friendly chickens. And so, on top of that, we also broad forked in compost amendments based on soil samples that we took. We knew, you know, depending on what levels our lovely agronomist was able to help us decide on, we then broad forked it into the soil, thus aerating and watering it in. This is the next season from the one prior. And if you remember the picture with the bare soil and the plants 2 or 3 feet high, you know, and the reason that we like to show this, most importantly, is if we had just settled and rested on our laurels and we were like, you know what, this will do, this will give us a crop, this is what the crop would look like year in and year out. Fast forward one summer, and now this is the reality of our greenhouses. So even if you can't do something that fixes it to its highest potential right this second, you can do something in no time that can change the entire trajectory of what it is you're doing.
And so now we get to this point where Shane and Jesse have a certain amount of luxury in that they've averted enough crises that they can now start to focus on longer term planning. And this is one of the first things to address. So, you know, you can read what it says, but like, I'll try to stand out of the way. Luckily I'm short. This pond is not, I don't think there's enough clay there, so this guy does leak. So this soil we're finding is just perennially saturated, right? Which means that when you have a major rain event, this ground is already completely wet. There's literally nowhere for the water falling from the sky to go except down this hill, and you can see it. Here's the evidence. This is all sheet erosion, right? So this is all water flowing either out of the soil or on the soil, daylighting its way down here. You can see that it makes its way right towards the garden. And of course, they've got a lot of, you know, diversion ditches here, and it's like the old Hohokam canals in Phoenix or something, and it's great, it's wonderful. But the problem is, as a short-term solution to avert the crisis, that's great, right? As a long-term solution, it's not going to work. So what's going to happen? Well, when there's profit, when things are going well, that money's gonna get put back into creating a series of swales here and planting water-loving trees here that will both suck the water up, that will flower early in the spring and promote pollinators. And then this can all be built, of course, with native plants, especially wildflowers, fruit trees, for their sake in the long term. But also other plants that, again, will provide either food or habitat for pollinators, but also for beneficial insects. The idea being, if we're going to use an IPM program, an integrated pest management program, to try to take care of pests, then if we don't provide egg-laying habitat for them to overwinter, pupating habitat, then they're going to keep spending a lot of money to bring in pirate bugs, let's say, to have them simply leave. So it's all about taking this and turning this into a highly diverse habitat for pollinators and beneficial insects that ultimately will save them a lot of money in the long run. Not to mention that it will improve yields because you won't have the kind of levels of pest and disease that you would have in a system that relies on reactivity to treat those things when they appear, rather than proactively supplying the habitat to prevent them. And so this is one of these bigger problems that's going to have to get fixed. Keeping in mind when we saw the pictures of like the compacted areas, those were what became greenhouses that are now producing 9 inches of grass growth in 5 days in April. Right? So we can take highly compacted, denuded soil and we can bring life back to it, but it's going to take intention and it's going to take planning. And that's kind of like the crux of all of this is like, when we're in crisis, we're in crisis. Deal with your crisis, absolutely, and then as soon as you can, get back to a place where you're figuring out what your goals are and you're making a long-term plan to get there. So you don't end up compromising that and always staying in the fast lane.
Yes. Okay. And then, so part of our mission statement, our creed, our plan has always been when we move to this new farm, we're going to make our own compost on the property, right? We have always wanted to, as part of the name Old Growth, we want to return the nutrients taken from the soil back to the soil. So we started a project this last year, making a fungal dominant, eventually Johnson Sioux compost out of pumpkins instead of manure for a nitrogen source. Wood chips from the property, and all of the cannabis stalks that we've used from the past years. One of the hurdles that we had to get over is, I'm sure a lot of you know, things like septoria, leaf spot, rust spot, whatever you want to call it, anything of that nature. You need to turn the compost pile and do thermophilic phasing, essentially a heating of the pile to fry any pathogens. A normal Johnson Sioux compost, and Jay will go more into it, but essentially we build a reactor. It's called a reactor. It's a huge, tall, vertical cylinder with vertical, aerated PVC piping so that you no longer need to turn the pile, so air gets to all of it. But we had to do thermophilic phasing in the field for 2 weeks first to kill all the septoria and everything of that nature. But now we're able to start giving back all of the nutrients that we've taken from the soil, as well as inoculate everything with indigenous microorganisms, which then by proxy are very helpful in pathogen resistance.
Yeah, you can see here, when it's steaming like that, in the cold months, we started in early November, those piles were getting up to about 160 degrees, which is what we needed to sterilize the septoria. It's a major problem, and that was sort of like a sine qua non, like we couldn't do this and compromise process and end up with this like inoculum that just spreads more septoria. So that was the first thing, was deal with the crisis, the septoria, which we all know is an issue for outdoor growers. And then after that, I'm kind of letting this play as we go, the goal then is to create this beneficial inoculum that essentially is a lot of decomposer microorganisms. When we're running greenhouses like this, I think it's a pretty natural and fair question to ask would be like, well, what about aspergillus, right? Like, we're going to be doing aspergillus testing for the state. How in the world are there not aspergillus spores in and amongst all of this? And the secret there is, we're trying to culture decomposer organisms that will target it. Aspergillus, when you walk around in the woods in the fall, that wonderful smell, like you're taking in aspergillus spores that are eating the leaves. So creating kind of like a more diverse microbiome to consume all these carbonaceous materials, that's sort of part of the insurance plan to get away from something like aspergillus, is making sure we have other decomposers that are not human pathogens that will actually create problems in people's lungs, so that aspergillus is simply outcompeted. And we're able to do that and pass those tests because we have an incredibly diverse microbiome. And so that's part of why we go this far and do all this work. Not to mention that, you know, using sort of like the native ingredients from this area, we're guaranteed to culture microbes that will actually cycle nutrients so they become plant available because they are cultured from the same site. You know what I'm saying? And that way we're bringing in less materials, and we're actually using what we have on site to its best purpose, so to speak. Yeah, absolutely.
And so that's Cindy and Ivan with Snowbird Botanicals over at the higher elevation booth.
Yeah, I'll be over there tomorrow.
Or tomorrow.
Yeah.
Awesome. It's a really great resource.
Yeah, and it's worth talking to if you know your local conservation district, it's worth reaching out to them because often they will link you. You know, they know the pathways and programs and they can usually link you. So that's another thing to consider.
That's exactly what I was going to say. Your local conservation district will help. Like I work with the Bennington County Conservation District and the Lincoln County Conservation District, and they know all the ins and outs of the grants and different programs that'll help you get some funding.
Yeah.
This is a great microcosm of what I'm talking about. You know what I mean? Like, reach out to the community. There's someone in the room that knows where to direct you. It's beautiful.
And I'm gonna wrap it up just because I don't want to go over, I don't know what the next speaker, but come to our booths. Old Growth Vermont, we've got a booth, and then Jay's got a booth with Vermont Compost. We'll be here all day today and tomorrow. And just be proud that you're in this cannabis industry because other states don't look like this in cannabis. Like what we're doing is really incredible. Other states are really into corporate cannabis. Yeah, you know, like this is what we've discussed today is a very different model than is going on anywhere else in the U.S. And so we should all be proud of that, like no matter how small of the things that we're doing. So thank you guys so much for coming. It's so good to see you.